Welcome to the Zinnov Podcast. You are listening to our Business Resilience series, where we bring to you conversations with eminent industry stalwarts and thought leaders from across the globe as they share their insights on overcoming challenges and the mindset that helps them navigate through journeys of crisis resilience and growth.
Hi everyone, welcome to another episode of the Zinnov Podcast. I'm Nitika Goel, CMO of Zinnov, and your host for today. The current crisis has perhaps presented the world with one of the most colossal tests of leadership. It demands the ability to act and not just react. It demands the courage and fearlessness in every decision and a high degree of accountability. It demands empathy and compassion. Leaders have had to manage huge transformation and business changes while having to cope with their own personal crises and fear. They have had to find their own balance while walking the tightrope on the other side of this pandemic. This pandemic has most certainly redefined leadership as we know it. To learn and understand a little bit more about what leadership means in a time of pandemic and what it means to be a crisis leader, I have with me today V Laxmikanth, also known as VLK. VLK is the Managing Director at Broadridge India and has more than 3 decades of rich industry experience. VLK, who I've had the privilege of interacting with for a long while now, is known for his unique brand of leadership and his unmatched ability to bring out the human side of a business. Thank you so much for being with us today, VLK.
Nitika, thank you for having me. Truly a pleasure talking to you and to the Zinnov team. As always, I personally find it energizing talking to you also. So thank you for having me with you all.
I'm so glad to have you here. So VLK, since I learn from you almost on a daily basis when I hear you talk or in any interaction that we have, I'm going to start with a little bit more personal question. I know you're very involved with people, leadership, redefining yourself. How did this pandemic change your leadership style? And what did you need to course correct in your personal capacity from this point forward?
Nitika, it's a great question. As you know, none of us were, expecting this pandemic, and that too of this magnitude, right? If you really think about it, this was essentially a healthcare crisis, which then became an economic crisis. So there's no playbook to it, and a lot of organizations, the more mature ones, have typically playbooks for most situations. So this one, there was no playbook. And personally, for me, I think the biggest learning / challenge was the fact that I'm more a leader who does his management by kind of walking around, right, and talking to people. So in a pandemic, when you're locked at home, that is kind of cut off. So in many ways, the oxygen has been cut off for me in terms of people interaction. So how do you still continue to engage your colleagues, your associates, when you really don't have direct contact? Is the biggest change in leadership style. So in order to do that, I think you need to spend a lot more time on communication, which is you really need to make it, a kind of way of life. You need to have a method to it. You need to have a list of people that you're going to talk to. You need to find ways of talking not just business, but also the personal side. And as you know, as we get into a phone-like conversation, the interactivity and the kind of conversation that you have around a coffee table or the cafeteria, that is something that I'm just trying to create. So I'm not saying I've made it. I'm not saying that I've changed significantly. I mean that in that sense, but I'm trying to change to incorporate that part of a leadership style, Nikita.
Got it. It's a very interesting point that you raised, that it is almost like cutting off your oxygen supply, which is obviously an instinct where you interact with people. What, in your opinion, are the key traits of a pandemic leader, and how did you trickle down those traits to the next level of your leaders, almost institutionalizing it as a part of your broader organization culture?
I mean, I don't know whether you want to call it a pandemic leader, Nitika. I would say that it's a crisis, right? And it could be any crisis. It could be, potentially, a takeover, or you're asking people to go. So there are various times organizations go through crisis. Okay, and most crisis, the defining thing for most crisis is uncertainty. Okay, if you really think about it, right, at the bottom of it all, we really don't know what's going to happen. And whether the crisis is going to get over in a day, 2 days, how are we going to handle, how are we going to respond. Crisis typically, like I said, means there is no playbook, one. And the second thing is typically there's uncertainty. And human beings, we don't like uncertainty, right? We have that fight or flee response. And most leaders at that point in time, it's about giving people comfort. So it is. I think it's very simple. It's like when things are going wrong, I think a leader standing up and saying, guys, don't worry. We have this covered. These are the 4 or 5 things that we are doing. Okay, and at the same time, the leader should also exhibit vulnerability. He can't be saying that this is a crisis. We are Superman. We're going to wish it away, or we're going to handle everything. No. The leader also needs to show that he's also vulnerable. He also is a little bit uncertain, but at the same time, have confidence, right? And or project confidence that things will get better. And as an organization, we have the resilience to handle it. And as human beings, we have resilience to handle crisis. Okay. So I think those should be the key messages that, leaders should give, whether it's a pandemic or, any crisis. The key is, how do you handle uncertainty? So same thing even at home, right? Let's say, there's a crisis situation, you really don't know. All you typically do is, you kind of reassure each other that, we are strong and we'll get over it. Okay. And there's always a father figure in the family. Similarly, the leader is the father figure in an organization. So he needs to be able to comfort people. So this is where, I think there's a difference between a manager and a leader, right? And, this is where, managers fall short, because manager, in my opinion, most often is about managing numbers. And, people respect you for the designations you're in, not because of yourself, right? And people, if they respect you for yourself, then they get a lot more comforted.
Got it. So, VLK, the second part of my question really was about how do you institutionalize this as a part of an organization culture? How do you teach this kind of leadership to the men and women in your company and the leaders in your company?
No, I don't know. I don't think you can really teach this. It's I'm not saying there's an inborn trait, etc., etc. Okay, so this is, I would say, typically what happens is, various leaders have, various styles. Okay, and it's like, for example, let's say, it's a T20 match, last couple of overs, Dhoni in his prime, looks so cool, calm, right? And you believe that he'll get you through. Okay. But there could be a Virat Kohli also doing the same thing, but Virat Kohli may be a lot more emotional, but he will still get it through. So I think you need to figure out what your leadership style is, okay? And you need to use your strengths, okay? But the same thing is, in a crisis, people need to translate this strength into some reassurance that you will get them through it, okay? So there is no formula for it. You can't, you see, lots of times, lots of organizations do that. They just think that we can give, an FAQ, and then everybody will go and parrot out that FAQ, and we're done. So that probably works in a regular situation, but in a crisis situation, the emotional quotient that the leader can bring to the table is extremely important. Okay, and you can't teach that. Okay, so this is something that people will evolve over a period of time. I believe it's good for people to go through crisis, or leaders to go through crisis, in order for them to understand their styles and and pick up something which really works for them, and which people can connect to.
Got it. So I think you talked about a crisis, and a crisis now in a remote scenario adds another very fine layer to it, right? The whole work from home. And I think you already talked about this in the beginning, that finding the pulse of your organization when you're not co-located also brings its own set of challenges. You talked about the fact that you're putting together some processes. It would be really great to understand how you're enabling that and how you're building this cohesive culture remotely.
So if you really think of it, I think the fundamental, change or mindset that leaders need to do is especially when you're working remote, right, is there's a fine line between synchronous and asynchronous communication. Okay. So what is synchronous? Synchronous is, we're all there together. We can bring everybody to a meeting room. We get very quickly to understand the status, right? And all of us are used to that. Asynchronous is more about the fact that you've given a task to somebody, and he's going to do it at his, pace, obviously with the whole team, but then you don't micromanage him on a day-to-day basis, right? If you do that, then the entire flexibility of working from home goes away, right? So what I mean for that example, let's say I'm at home, all of us have lunch at 1 o'clock, but if my boss insists that every day, I meet him at 1 o'clock, I lose that flexibility of being at home, and I don't then, enjoy being at home, nor do I enjoy the meeting, right? So if my boss says, I don't care, get your job done, and let me know when you're done. And if you have an issue, just let me know. Then, I can work at my pace. Okay. Obviously, I need to make sure I'm still collaborating with my team. So I think the biggest change that we can do is instill the fact that a synchronous mode of working is a way for success in a remote working environment. Okay. Micromanagement is not. So what typically organizations do, especially now, is they'll say you need to talk to your people, okay? And then there is a spreadsheet maintained. Like, did you talk to them at 9 o'clock? Did you talk to them at 12? Did you talk to them at 3? I mean, that defeats the purpose, because then you're getting too intrusive and too micromanaging. So what we have been working very consciously is to tell our people that it is not, you don't have to micromanage people in their time. You need to allow them to work at their pace, okay, and make sure the deliveries happen in an asynchronous manner. So that, I think, is the biggest change that we are, trying to institutionalize across the organization.
Got it. So VLK, like you, that is a very interesting point. There's a lot more leadership training, a lot more leadership direction. So often I'm pretty sure the leaders themselves are very exhausted, because in addition to their regular work, managing people's expectations, other people's fears, and also finding a balance between their own personal and professional lives. So how does a leader really continue to find balance, and also, more importantly, a continued sense of purpose and a leadership narrative, even when there's no end date in sight for this crisis?
So if you, this is great in the sense, I think, fantastic question. I think there are three parts to it, right? If you look at it, from an individual perspective, right? When we all started this, work from home, it was all fun, because it was new, it was novel. We felt that, this is going to get done in another couple of months. So we were like, everybody was 24/7, and obviously there's nothing else to do anyway. So it kind of worked. While, people sacrificed their home lives, they were a lot more productive from a work front. But once this is a long haul, I think, people need to look at the way they work from home. So one is obviously, like I said, basic infrastructure, etc. Make sure you're comfortable, etc. Secondly, and I think you use the word rhythm, and I want to use the word discipline there. So you need to get disciplined about, how you work. But there should be fixed timings that you get to. I know there should be some amount of flexibility, but you need to have some discipline about when I'm working, I'm fully engaged on that. I'm not doing anything else. You need to take the appropriate breaks, etc., etc. So it requires a lot more discipline, because it's easy for you, because you're not commuting, right? So you're going from one room to the other, or, one table to the other to work. So it's very easy to get into a 24/7, work schedule. And then that will obviously cause fatigue, that will cause depression, etc. So consciously, you need to take breaks. Okay. Consciously, you need to put in a routine. So second thing, I think we tend to underestimate the importance of, physical, health, right? And obviously eating right, and more importantly, exercising right. So discipline in terms of work habits, discipline in terms of, exercising and getting the right, nutrition is going to be extremely key. Okay. The third thing is, as an organization, as a leader, you have actually 2-3 roles, right? And let's talk of leadership more at, the senior and middle and, executive levels, okay? So at a mid-level and even at the project lead kind of level, a lot more task-based. So you more comfortable in this environment. But as you grow more senior, your job is two things, right? One is to make sure the organization is delivering. Secondly, communicate the vision of the organization to the associates, right? So if you have to do that, you have to establish connectedness. There's no way that you can communicate a vision without connectedness. So one of the things, for example, what we're doing is we are kind of working out a program/plan where we tell leaders and even associates that one of the measures for how they should rate themselves as doing well in a pandemic and work from home is how many relationships they have built outside their teams. How many conversations they have, had outside the teams, which is, for example, I'm working on a certain project. I know 4 people in my team. Great. I probably talk to them 10 times a day. But there could be another team which I'm not really connected with. Okay. Have I, built that relationships in an office physical setting, right? You could do that easily, right? So, the idea is how can you make that happen in a virtual setting. So we're trying to say that, the situation is important, not the physical location, right? And you need to create situations in order to make your connection. So that's the third part of what we're trying to do. Fourth part is what we're telling our leaders is when you're talking to people, I think there should be 3 tracks that you talk of. One is you should be talking about the purpose and meaning of the organization so that people still understand and connect to it. The second thing is you should talk more, not more, I would say, not more, but there should be non-work related conversation. And the third thing is work related conversation. So every meeting should probably have, these 3 aspects to it at a senior level. So that's the overall high level structure that we are working towards.
That is a great set of points that you made, VLK, just sort of synthesizing what you talked about. You said having high EQ is very important, managing synchronous and asynchronous communication, having a discipline and establishing a routine so you're not overwhelmed, spending a little time being physically active and taking care of both your mind and body. And last but not the least, connecting with your colleagues across multiple dimensions, be it purpose and meaning of the organization, be it non-work related things, having both a professional and a personal connect in a very seamless manner. So I think those are really great points and which encompasses leadership holistically. And like you very rightly said, it's not just about this pandemic. It's really about dealing with any crisis, and this could be things that hold them in good stead. But before we let you go, I think it will be really interesting to have our listeners get a sense from you in terms of the things that make a difference and impact you as a leader. So I'm going to put you in front of a rapid fire, and if that works for you.
Yeah, sure.
Great. So which is a book that you have read recently that has left a huge impact on you?
No, actually, very interestingly, I've had time to actually reread some of the books. Okay. There's a very, very good book called Agile Gene, okay, by a guy called Matt Ridley. I kind of read that. It talks about the basics, right? Which it talks about, whether nature or nurture is, defines a human being, right? And I've always been fascinated by it because if you really think of it, it also from an organizational perspective, right? How much of nurture is important, which means how much of creating an environment is important, and how much of nature, how much of the innate skills and talent is important. So I always found it very interesting, and this is a great book on that one, and I loved it.
Fantastic. Whose crisis leadership style has impressed you most in the recent past?
I would say the New Zealand Prime Minister Ardern. So fantastic, right? If you really think of what she's accomplished, whether it is the terrorist crisis or the COVID crisis, or even winning an election, doing all of that, she seems to be so calm and composed, and on top of things, and yet very approachable. So I saw a kind of a YouTube video where she picks up, one of those talk show hosts at the airport in her own car, and takes him around the town. So there seems to be she seems to know what she wants to do. She seems to be calm, composed. Like I said, she seems to be able to inspire people. at the same time down to earth. So I think I like that style. So.
What are some of the interesting skills that you've picked up in a lockdown?
I would say it's an interesting skill. I would say that kind of appreciation for the family. What I mean by that is, I had the last 6 months spent more time with my kids and my wife than I probably did in over the last 30 years. Okay, so that to me has brought a slightly different perspective. That we all talk, work-life balance, etc., right? And it was, while I kind of understood it, I probably understood it academically. But once you spend your time at home, then you really understand that why it's important. Okay, why work-life balance is important, and why you need to have interest and other activities outside of your work. So I would say that has been learning, and that's what I've kind of invested in, trying to understand a little more of what my kids are doing and trying to connect with them. For example, my elder one is doing a doctorate in medical anthropology, so I'm just trying to understand what that means. So my younger one is done a master's in education policy. A lot of very interesting learnings from them, and it's a very different way of thinking, whether it's an anthropologist or somebody in the education field compared to somebody in an IT field. So I would say learning that kind of skills, more, I would say, right brain kind of thinking. So that's the way I would say it. And more, connectedness with everybody.
Fantastic. And right before we sign off, VLK, if one word of advice to any crisis leader out there.
No, I think we should have self-belief. Okay, the self-belief is very important because at the end of the day, self-belief matters. If you believe in yourself, and who else is going to believe in you anyway, right? So if you believe in yourself that you will be able to overcome, I think, you will be able to overcome. And if you believe that you will not be able to overcome, you will not be able to overcome. So I think self-belief is the key, and you should believe in yourself.
Absolutely. I think that's very, very profound words of wisdom before we end this podcast. Once again, thank you, VLK, for your time. As always, it's a pleasure and an learning experience talking to you. And to our listeners, thank you so much for listening in to this episode of the Zinnov Podcast.
Thanks, guys. Truly appreciate it. And as always, again, the pleasure is mutual. Always love talking to you guys. And Zinnov is a great organization. You guys got great leadership, great values. Truly a privilege to be associated with you guys.
Thank you so much, VLK.
Thank you for listening to this episode of Zinnov's Business Resilience series. Stay tuned for more such interesting episodes and subscribe to our podcast on Google Podcast, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts from. To know more about Zinnov, and if you believe we can help with your problems, please visit our website www.zinnov.com or drop us a note at info@zinnov.com. Thank you again, and don't forget to tune in to our next episode.